All right, good morning, everybody. People are starting to log in. The participant numbers are going up. We're gonna wait a minute or so to make sure everybody's in and going before we start the webinar. So this is the Enlist Corn webinar, giving you an update on 2023, and then we'll talk about Enlist Corn. So we'll just give it a minute for everybody to get logged in. Okay, the numbers are slowing down a little bit. Just give it a little bit more, couple of seconds here. But Happy New Year to everybody. I think a lot of us may be waking up under a nice little blanket of snow. I'm just below that line. I'm in Indianapolis and we got rain all night. It just rained. So even the snow that we got the other day is gone. So I grew up in Wisconsin, so I enjoy snow. So it's a little sad for me. I'm gonna have to go travel. But we'll get started here. It looks like the participant numbers are slowing down quite a bit.
I'm Scott Youngman. I'm joining you from snowy Iowa. My background is not projecting this morning for some reason, but you can see the snow out the back window here, or the background window. So yeah, Tony, you can have it.
All right. So Scott mentioned he's from Iowa. My name is Tony Gady. I cover Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. I live here in Indiana. We're going to be presenting today, bouncing off each other, and just hope that you guys find this educational and useful for you. So what we're going to talk about today is, the recap of the 2023 season. What some of the wins that we did have and how it looks, as well as we're going to move into talk about the corn trait tolerances. We're going to, what Enlist Corn actually is for you and how it can help you. And then different ways to do a program approach with Enlist Corn. A thing I want to bring up and mention to everybody is we appreciate questions. If you have questions as we go along, you can type them into the Q&A function. Not the chat function, but the Q&A function will allow us to see them. And we're going to have two different areas where we're going to address these questions. One will be kind of towards the middle, and then at the end, we'll cover all the questions that come through. It may be about an hour-long webinar, depending on the number of questions. So we'll just stick around at the end and make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. So the 2023 season recap, the highlights here, Enlist traded soybeans became the #1 traded soybean in the U.S. with over 50% of the soybeans planted are Enlist soybeans, and so it surpassed our goals for the year, and it became the #1 soybean trait. We've had over 140 million acres sprayed with Enlist herbicides. That is over an 80% spray rate, and so which means more than 8 out of 10 acres that are planted with Enlist traits get sprayed, which is a huge number, and it just means it goes to show that people who are adopting the Enlist technology are using it and they're finding it easy to use. And we also get questions on Enlist One versus Enlist Duo and why it's hard to get one or the other and things like that. Our production is about 90-10. As far as sales go, 93% of sales of Enlist or Enlist Duo, 93% is Enlist One, and 7% last year in 2023 was Enlist Duo. So that, that's by design, and that goes to show, that Enlist One with its flexibility and intake mix partners, as we'll talk about a little bit later, it really gives you a great tool. So Scott and I both are Enlist field specialists, and those of you who might be new to the game, this is kind of a slide that'll walk through who we are and what we do. We reach out and we educate, and we just kind of make sure that people who are, stakeholders in the Enlist or in farming in general, know what Enlist technology is. In 2023, we reached over 27,000 growers, and some of them were in classroom, but a lot of them were out in the field, like you see that picture there. The average time is about an hour if it's in class, an hour and a half, if it's out in the field, just walking through hands-on, just, really making sure people are comfortable with the stewardship and Enlist in general. So the Enlist field specialists, we're dedicated. We are, focused on Enlist, and we're focused on education. We do technology demonstrations. We talk about stewardship, when to use Enlist, when not to use Enlist. And then we get out and do service calls and some other advocacy with growers or, other organizations. So this shows you the trajectory, or the hockey stick, if you will, of the traded acres and how it grew. So as you can see, in 2017, it was, very low, but in these last couple of years, 21, 22, and 23, we did incline quite a bit. And we're expected in 24 and 25 to grow, because we're not only, growing in soybeans, but we're also growing in corn as well. And so that brings me up to the relaunch that we had in 2023 of Enlist corn. Many of you have been to our field days, which we talked about it. And we talked about PowerCore Enlist and Vorceed Enlist, which Scott will go into details on in the upcoming slides. Part of the reason why the Enlist is growing so well is we have over 120 seed licensees brands who are licensing out the Enlist E3 and soybeans. And we also have a robust multi-channel seed brands, including Brevant, which really, gives you many options and many different ways to buy Enlist traded seeds. We're also regrouping in the South and trying to come up with a new strategy. And we've got a thing set with a soybeans conversion, trying to help the growers down there really expand the Enlist cotton business. So I'm going to pass it over to Scott, and he's going to talk about some of the trait tolerances.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. You mentioned the relaunch, and I think just to clarify what that means here, and this slide shows you that we launched last year, essentially the relaunch. We did launch Enlist corn back in 18, but at that point we didn't have the refuge in the bag component. We hadn't had those components. We didn't have the herbicide tolerances they needed. So it was refuge in a bag. So the exciting thing now today is that we're launching Enlist corn with obviously refuge in a bag. All the herbicide tolerances that we're going to talk about, the 4 herbicide tolerances are there, amazingly enough. And then we're going to talk about 6 insect traits that you get with the Vorceed. But just quickly, you see quickly there, 16 was cotton, 18 was Enlist corn, 19 was E3 soybeans. So time marches on, and we keep bringing to you new Enlist technology, and I think it's exciting. And I'm excited, as Tony said, we're over 55% U.S. share now in soybeans. Iowa's well over 60, and marching forward. So this is what the trait package that we bring to you with Enlist corn. And what this slide shows you is the evolution of what Corteva's offerings would be as we went from Acre Max, which would have been above ground insect protection, and we went to what we call PowerCore Enlist now. PowerCore Enlist is your above ground package. Essentially, Vorceed will be the below ground package, above and below ground. And I'm talking insect traits for all of you. So with PowerCore Enlist, we went over to a Mon 8-9 above ground protection with our Herculex, and of course the 4-way herbicide stack with it. With Vorceed, that's where we added to that same PowerCore. We added 3 different rootworm proteins. One of them, of course, being RNAi, and then our Herculex rootworm. Simply put, folks, this is the broadest spectrum of traits that you can get in a hybrid today. And that's, some of you may be saying, well, is that good? It is when you're forward breeding with the traits, when you put the traits in early onto your breeding, and so everything coming out is new, advanced, high yielding genetics. So it is a great thing. Now in the middle, you see PowerCore Enlist Ultra. You may be asking, that's for some of you folks that have a little bit more Western bean cutworm or black cutworm pressures. Excuse me, not black cutworm, corn earworm, tobacco bollworm, whatever you want to call that critter. So that's for some of those areas that it offers the VIP trait in there. Again, just more advanced above ground protection. So just quickly, you see that with PowerCore Enlist, you do get these critters. This is again above ground. You got 3 modes of action on corn borer, which is important. And some of you with fall armyworm, I know can be a big problem. And then it's the only one that offers any protection to black cutworm. So the PowerCore Enlist, it comes down to the 3 proteins that come into it. 2 of them come from Mon 8/9. That's the BT trait. One of them is Cry1F. So there's 3 modes of action for above ground insect protection. So you'll hear me talk about when we're trying to control water hemp and soybeans or corn. I like belts and suspenders approach, meaning I want dual mode of action pre, dual mode of action post in my herbicides. I like triple mode of action insect protection too. That's what PowerCore Enlist brings you. Of course, along with that will be the 4 herbicide modes of action that we're going to go into a little more detail on. The glyphosate, which I'll sometimes say glufosinate, glue, Liberty, of course, 2,4-D, and then the FOP tolerance, which we'll get into a little bit as well. Here's PowerCore Ultra. As I mentioned before, it just adds the Cry1F event. So that Cry1F brings that corn earworm and western bean cutworm critters into fold. And those, if you've got them, those can make for some nasty looking ears, and it's nice to have that clean looking grain that comes off there when you have that protection from those guys. Vorceed will be, simply put, just the broadest spectrum insect protection that you can get. We like to talk about the flexibility to manage corn rootworm because of the fact that you have the Herculex rootworm protection, and then you got mRNAi, which does a great job of preventing adult emergence. I think we say up to 99% removal of adult corn rootworm, being westerns and northerns are 2 primary rootworms we talk about. Again, forward breeding, maximum yield potentials there. That's not going to be a concern. Exceptional control, easy to use because of the flexibility of having 4 herbicide modes of action that I talked about. So again, you look at this chart and you say, wow, okay, 10 modes of action. That's Tony, I mean, you and I can remember when we had single mode of action. We thought we were in tall cotton back then when we had 1 BT protein for corn borer, we had 1 herbicide trait. And those exciting times. Now we're talking about hybrids that have 10 traits in them, or 10 proteins as it is. Some of these traits come in with double insertion. So like, for example, the Chrome package on that Vorceed, Chrome brings in 2 traits. And the Herculex above and Herculex rootworm below, Herculex 1 above. And what this chart doesn't show you is SmartStax Pro doesn't use that technology. So Chrome, being an easier insertion technique, it widens the funnel of Corteva germplasm that we can bring to you. So that means more inbreds are easily converted without yield suppression, meaning they meet your yield criteria. So ultimately, it means more products to you, more high yielding, faster advances in yield growth with the fact that we use the Chrome insertion in there with the Vorceed Enlist corn. And then, as I mentioned earlier, RNAi, excited about that. You see the 99% reduction in western and northern corn rootworm beetles. Wow, 4 herbicide traits, 2 of them brand new. 2,4-D choline, never been done. Now you can use 2,4-D up to 30-inch corn, D8 corn in your Enlist corn. Again, PowerCore Enlist or Vorceed. And you also have FOP tolerance. I know we've got some people on here that are coming from the deep south, and you've probably got some resistant grasses. Now you can throw 16 ounces of Assure out there and control those grasses. Or for those of us in the Midwest dealing with volunteer corn in a corn-on-corn situation, you can control volunteer corn that first year. Tony, we probably will talk about maybe a little bit more of that here. I get, well, let me address that now. I brought it up. So sometimes it surprises us to think when we say FOP tolerance kill volunteer corn, right? Well, that works when we switch over to enlist corn because the previous corn didn't have FOP tolerance. It wasn't enlist corn. But would it work on volunteer corn coming off an enlist cornfield? If I had enlist corn followed by enlist corn? What's the answer on that, Tony?
It does not work.
It does not work because it's going to be FOP tolerant. So it's a one-time deal. But the exciting thing is you can do it that one time, and you can control resistant grasses down south that are glyphosate resistant. So here's the four
So Scott, in that situation where it's corn on corn enlist, what would you use to control volunteer corn?
In corn on corn, if you didn't have FOPs, you can't.
Right. And it's not any different than how it is now. And so that's the one thing that a lot of people will bring up, you know, but it's the same as what they're doing now. So it gives them that advantage that you 1 year, first year switch over, or if you're using other corn varieties the year before, but it's a really good tool to have. And especially, like you said, those grasses. That's a good point.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Because some people will sometimes look at the negative approach to that and say, well, I can't kill my volunteer corn the second year. Well, you could the first year, and that's a tremendous advantage for the first time. It's something we've never had before. And then, of course, those tough grasses. So I don't want to belabor this too much. You guys aren't too crazy about which genes bring it in, but if you're kind of in the technology side of things a little more, here's the genes that are used to bring in the AAD1 gene is used in enlist corn and soybeans. We talk about the AAD12 gene, which brings in the herbicide tolerances. But in corn, it's the AAD1, and then we've used that PAT gene for glufosinate, and then the SPS gene on the Roundup. So the one thing interesting on this chart, so FOPs are Quizella FOP, right? That's a Sure 2. That's the herbicide that's registered in enlist corn. Could I use a dim herbicide, Tony? What would happen if I sprayed my enlist corn with a dim? Like, what is it?
You would, if it was too tall, you would ding it really bad and turn it yellow. But if it's small enough, you'd kill it. You'd wipe it out.
Like clethodim, right?
Yep.
So clethodim is still our preferred volunteer corn product in soybeans. Clethodim will kill enlist corn is just as well. It's only tolerant to the FOPs, that class of post-emergence graminicides called the FOPs. So important clarification there. And that's great. We don't want it to be tolerant to DIMs because we need something to control volunteer corn and soybeans. And that's our preferred method in soybeans. Potential crop response, looked at a lot of enlist corn. I've never seen this photo on the right where you see that temporary leaning. Sometimes we talk on soybeans that first hour, those soybeans will kind of drop their leaves a little bit. Some people say it lasts through the day and goes away the next morning. When it gets that big dose of 2,4-D choline that's in enlist 1 and enlist, then we see some temporary response. This is what can happen in corn. I've not seen it again, but it goes away quickly. We don't have to worry about anything on yield. And then you see a little bit of some of that necrosis at the end of the leaf tissues on these plants on the left. I'll tell you, folks, that's kind of stuff you don't want to let your customers get too wrapped up around the axles on. Yeah, we don't want it, but it's really, really, really irrelevant. And don't get me going on a little bit of soybean burn either, because I look for a little bit of a soybean. I'm a big methylated seed oil guy. And I look for just a slight amount of crop response because I know I'm going to get tremendous active in weeds. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So there's two kinds of brittle in corn. One is genetic brittle. Genetic brittle is why you look in the catalog and you see a hybrid has a 7 for brittle and it's above average, and it's going to do a good job in a windstorm. And some people in the Western Corn Belt worry about this quite a bit, and as they should. So that's genetic brittle. Enlist does nothing to change genetic brittle. If the hybrid was brittle before, it's still brittle. But what Enlist does is it prevents 2,4-D induced brittleness. So that's the second kind of brittleness is its auxin herbicide. Your 2,4-D will make a corn plant brittle if it's not Enlist corn. If it's not Enlist corn, 2,4-D would make it brittle. So that goes away with Enlist corn is the 2,4-D Enlist brittle, and some of that goosenecking, lodging, brace root fusion, that kind of stuff that you can see. Tony, anything you want to add there?
No, I think especially with brittle snap, it's something important to understand because there is, like you said, natural brittle snap, but that auxin-induced brittle snap that can get pretty, pretty bad because an auxin, it's a growth regulator, so it makes it grow, and that's, it takes that and it creates an air time where if you get some wind, it'll snap if it's growing too fast, and that's what with Enlist technology in there. That doesn't change that at all. It doesn't have that auxin induced. So you did a good job.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Boy, here's a slide I like. So here's some of the modes of action we can use. And another thing I get on my soapbox about is I'm a pretty big Enlist glyphosate guy. Enlist glyphosate methylated seed oil is one of our favorite combinations in Iowa. And you get out there with 4-inch less water hemp, it'll smoke everything that's out there. But so you see here the ugly kid sister to water hemp, Palmer Amaranth. You see Enlist Glide doing a great job on it. That utility is there for you in corn. Are we going to be recommending Enlist corn, Enlist glyphosate as a planned program? No, probably not, unless you've got a really broad spectrum pre-down. And we'll get into that. Tony will a little bit, but I'll kind of give you a sneak peek. We're not going to be jumping up and down telling you to spray every acre with 2,4-D Enlist in your corn. You have that option, and some people will do that, of course, because of the utility. But for example, in Iowa, we are a big pre-emergence state, and we sell a lot of Resicor, Sure Start, Keystone, Full Time, those herbicides, and they work exceptionally well. And so a lot of times we're not left with a lot of weeds post-emergence. So maybe Enlist glyphosate would be okay if I had a very, very broad spectrum down there. But we're going to talk about that briefly a little bit later in managing resistance. Yes, you can use Enlist on Enlist. That can be done. But Enlist corn, it's got to be an additional tool. It's not a replacement. Hey, I got Enlist corn, now I can just go out and spray all my corn with Enlist glyphosate. That's a bad recipe. That's a bad recipe. And Tony, I bet you do got a comment on that one.
Well, I'll save a lot of my comments to my slides coming up. Yeah, I think you're doing a great job though.
Okay, very good. Fair enough, because we want to keep you guys on time too. This is what corn on the left looks like that's not Enlist corn. It's after it's been sprayed with a Sure 2. Of course, it's a corn killer, right? It's post-emergence agraminicide. That's what it's going to do. There's corn on the right. Complete robust tolerance to azalafop. That's in a Sure 2. Robust tolerance to 2,4-D choline, robust tolerance to glufosinate, robust tolerance to glyphosate. So summary real quick, just talked about PowerCore Enlist, PowerCore Enlist Ultra, and Vorceed. Those are the brands you're going to hear when you see those 3 trait packages. You know you're getting 4 herbicide modes of action. It's not E3, it's not E4. It's called Enlist, PowerCore Enlist. It's called Vorceed. So with that, Tony, I don't see anything coming up on Q&A. I see something in chat.
I told everybody in chat to use the Q&A function. We have no questions. That means you used all your words and did really well on things. One of the things that those of you who have been through a field demo last year, we did cover a lot of the corn. And we're going to be doing that again this year. So make sure if you haven't been out to one of our field demos that you do make it out there and get a chance to get your hands on and see what we're talking about. It's a really good event. So talk to your local retailer or Corteva rep and we'll help you get out there. But if we don't have any questions to this time, we'll keep rolling and maybe let you guys get some time back at the end here. Oh, we do have a question. when should we expect to see Vorceed Enlist available? I can take that one. We did have some Vorceed available in select areas in 2023. We are going to roll it out more in 24, so there should be some in different areas. And then we're going to really ramp it up. 25, it should be commercially available in most locations. Scott, did you want to add to that where Vorceed might be in your area?
Well, in PowerCore Enlist at the same time, or all the traits, if you know, if you need the PowerCore Ultra, you know, it's not a 100% switch overnight. As genetics evolve, and as you get these genetics with the right yield, you know, the yield gains is what you want to bring, usually why you want to switch hybrids, and or you know, better agronomics or better traits in terms of herbicides. You could be doing that, but it'll be a phase in, and as Tony said, 25 you'll be having people that can offer you 100% packages. 24 is going to be, you know, in areas you could plant 30, 40. I think maybe Nebraska might be a little higher, for example, but it's going to vary. But we're phasing in, and by 26, 27, that's the only thing you'll be able to get from Corteva.
Right. And that's a good point. I do want to reemphasize, you know, if we have good genetics out there, we're not just going to swap it over to Vorceed Enlist or PowerCore Enlist, you know, just because. We want to make sure that life cycle of the genetics we have out there are maximized. And so it'll be a growth. And right now it's, you know, like, what was it? 107 to 110 or something like that. 111 day corn is really focused on there, but we're going to grow it on both ends, expand it on both ends of the growing season. Another question came through is about locations in Nebraska. Are we going to have any in Nebraska for field events? The short answer is yes. There is going to be one in Nebraska. I'm not exactly sure because I don't cover that area, what city that's going to be in, but I think it's going to be centrally located.
Yes, there is one or two in Nebraska, and I want to say York. It's been in York, but
yeah, York sounds right.
I think it's going to be York again. I think, but yeah, there will be. Our counterpart has we definitely have locations in Nebraska this coming summer. Definitely work with your enlist specialist or your crop protection territory manager or your seed provider, and funnel that question up that you have some desires there.
That's a good questions. So those were the questions that we had. I think you did a good job, Scott. I'm going to start walking through the Enlist program approach, and we're going to look at the different CP side of things as you're planting the seed. So a lot of people are like, you know, why bring Enlist to corn? You know, my corn, I'm happy with what I got. And that's great. You know, we're glad people are happy with the herbicide program that they have. And if it's working for you, great. We just want to bring people options. And the weed management, the flexibility, you know, you've got more modes of action. As Scott alluded to, you know, the suspenders and belt approach, I think I'm going to adopt that to my field days. But we really want to make sure that you guys can do one or can do other, or if you need to, both. With 2,4-D choline, you know, tolerance, the FOP tolerance, glufosinate, and glyphosate, it really gives you a lot of that flexibility in season, especially if you have some late season broadleaves that come up like morning glories or the wild cucumbers, things like that are kind of hard to control. Being able to bring 2,4-D out, you know, with Enlist really helps you. Peace of mind, you know, we've talked about that for a couple of years now, you know, with, you know, dicamba being pretty volatile, you know, there still is about 20% of the corn market, according to different market research, receives some sort of dicamba. And that dicamba does volatilize and it does ding crops downwind and nearby. So, you know, being able to use Enlist or 2,4-D choline really helps and give you peace of mind, you know, kind of that friendly neighbor. 2,4-D choline has Colex D. So as we've talked in the soybean the last couple of years, 2,4-D choline is a new formulation and it's bonded. The salt and the acid are bonded together in a better bond so it doesn't break down and it doesn't volatilize. Well, Colex D is kind of taking a back seat to that, but it really is important as well because that reduces the physical drift side of things. And so, you know, what you're getting with Enlist is not only, near zero volatility, but you're also getting reduced physical drift compared to other forms of 2,4-D, which is really important to understand. And, we've talked in the past that on an acid-to-acid basis, 2,4-D or Enlist is 236 times less volatile than dicamba. And so it really does stay where you spray it. And people who are using it have found that out, that they can just draw a line down their field, on the field edges and that with Enlist, and it really stays where they want it to.
Hey, Tony.
Yep.
Hate to jump in so quick here, but back to your slide there about DRA. Colex D performs the function of your drift reducing agent. Please do not add any additional DRA to that. All you're going to do is change the droplet size to a droplet we don't want. We want droplets that go for coverage. We've got all the DRA you need in there. Again, you love methylated seed oil. We want AMS and all that, but no additional DRAs, please.
That's very good. Yeah, that's a KSU professor, Wolf, once called, some DRAs that maybe didn't do the right work. He called it hucky pucky, and it's really sticky stuff, and it really makes the droplet form in ways you don't want it to, and it doesn't maximize the efficacy. So that's very, very wise of you to bring that up, Scott, because I don't think we have a slide on that in corn. So, we've talked about Enlist 1, Enlist Duo. I think this is a great opportunity for us just to rehash that. Enlist 1 is just straight goods, 2,4-D choline. And so, you can tank mix that with, not only glyphosate, but Liberty. So that's also an important advantage that we have. We can go out in the same tank with Liberty. Enlist Duo is a blend. It has the 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate. And so it has that, the old Durango that we used to carry, it has that in the tank with it as well. And so there's a small market, 7% in 23, that likes that convenience package. And so it's a great fit where there's a lot of grasses and you want to use it in that. So post-timing applications, Scott talked about it a little bit when he was talking about PowerCore Enlist. You can use Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo over the top, all the way up through V8. And so it talks about V8 or 30 inches. And as we saw in 2023, when you have a droughty year, sometimes V8 is a lot less than 30 inches. And as we move to different varieties of corn and that, it may or may not be. And so I really want to emphasize, look at the growth, and V8 or 30 inches is post what you can do, lines right up with glyphosate. One of the reasons why we want to mention the growth stage is we don't want to be spraying stuff down into the whirl as the tassel's trying to come out. And so really make sure what you're looking at with your field, and V8's a good post timing. If you look at glyphosate, it's the same. Liberty emergence through V6, and so it's a little bit earlier. And so if you want to do a post application of Enlist Liberty, you're kind of limited to the V6 stage, but with Enlist 1, Enlist Duo, you can go all the way up to V8 or 30 inches. The thing I want to pull out too is if you're using drop nozzles, you can go all the way up to 48 inches. The drop nozzles keeps it out of the whirl, and the growing stage isn't as important there. So it allows you the full range to get out there if you have some of those late season broadleaves that you really want to control. The other thing to bring up is Assure 2 or Quizalofop. The label talks about in V2 to V6. So you really want to make sure that using Assure 2, it's in that window there, and that gives you the maximum control of some of those grasses and everything when you're spraying in that with Assure 2. So you can customize your post. And again, if you're happy with what you have, we're not saying you have to spray Enlist on every acre. With soybeans, it really is an advantage. And so you go out there and you spray every acre that you got with Enlist E3 soybeans. But with corn, it's a tool in the toolbox. If you have one field that has a lot of problems, you can pull out Enlist and use it. If you have another field that you're really happy with what your first post is and everything, great. You don't have to pull the Enlist out of the toolbox at that field. We want to give you that flexibility.
Tony, you bring up a really good point there in terms of, the previously we had the question about how soon are we evolving to Vorceed and PowerCore Enlist and PowerCore Ultra, and we said it's a gradual process. there's a lot of logic to the fact that I'm going to have 100% of my fields before I switch to an Enlist program so that I know I don't have any sprayer confusion. So we anticipate that kind of slowing some of the Enlist spraying, just because retailers don't want to, and farmers don't want to deal with complexity of having different fields. Of course, potential for mishaps. So there's the point of getting to 100% of your lineup, 100% of the seed you plant being one of the, the Enlist technologies before you switch.
Yep. Very good point. Best management practices. I really want to emphasize to people, spray with small weeds. If you got 2 to 3 inch weeds and you're spraying them, you're going to have a great control, great efficacy, and you're going to be satisfied with that. Now, those 2 to 3 inch weeds, you're using, 2 pints per acre of Enlist or 4.75 pints per acre of Enlist Duo. And when those weeds get to up 6 inches or 8 inches, which is 2x or 3x of what you're looking at, you're not including any additional herbicide. So you're wanting that same herbicide that does a great job at 2 or 3 inches to work at 6 or 8 or 10 inches, which we don't recommend. So really spray those small weeds. And also when they're actively growing. So this year we saw that in a drought, when those weeds are suppressed and they're hardened off, it's really hard to control them. And you really have to get at it. You really have to, increase the amount of MSO that you're using or COC. But always make sure, it doesn't matter if you have just patches of areas or your field is covered with it, full rates when it's actively growing. Nozzles, the last 3-4 years, we've really talked about using qualified nozzles. Enlist.com has, where you can get all the approved nozzles that are on there. Pick one that fits into your operation and you'll be really happy as long as it's one of the green approved nozzles. And then the upper end of the approved pressure for those nozzles. So I always talk to people about 75%, 75 to 80% of that nozzle range. So let's say that you have a nozzle that can spray from, 40 to 80 PSI. I would like it closer to that, 60, 70 PSI range. It gives you a little headspace. So if you're going down a hill or something like that, or if you have some nozzle control, but it also, as you're slowing down towards the end of a field or trying to turn around, those nozzles are still performing like they should, and they don't reduce their spray pattern. Sufficient water carrier volume. I really do not ever recommend 10 GPA, 10 gallons per acre. I'm always 15 to 20 gallons per acre, closer to that 20 if you're using Liberty. So if and anything happens, if you're having problems with mixing in that, put in 15 gallons per acre, and 90 to 98% of those problems go away with 15 gallons per acre.
Tony,
yeah, go ahead.
So the difference is, I want folks to understand, if you're in Louisiana, you got humidity to spare, and gallonage isn't as important. When you get to Iowa, when we've had our 3rd year of dry weather in a row, now foot of snow out there might make you think different today, but absolutely no 10-gallon work, please, in Iowa. Nothing less than 15 with glyphosate. We've got many people using 20 gallons of water with glyphosate now. I know water's a pain to haul, but it's one way to ensure coverage. And so 10, I'm sorry, I didn't catch this earlier. We would have taken that 10 off there and put 15 to 20 for you, just like Tony said. Thank you.
Yep. And then that last bullet point is really important. The spray additives, there's no prohibition on AMS. And so we recommend putting AMS in. It is a great water conditioner, and you put it in first because it is a water conditioner. Make sure it goes in and it conditions the water so you don't get that herbicide bind up with the different things. And then also, we recommend a good COC or an MSO. You put those in at the end, and those help with the droplets, and they help the life expectancy of those droplets, because as soon as the sprayer sprays and creates that spray pattern with those droplets, the environment is already starting to evaporate those droplets. And so having the right additives in there not only keeps the life expectancy of that droplet to the plant, gives it time for the herbicide to get into that plant, into the weed, and make sure that you have great control. So when we talk about a program approach, if you've been to any Corteva meeting in the past 3-4 years, you've seen a slide like this. And so this is just the evolution of that. This one's focused is on corn. And so you can see we really want to start clean to stay clean, start clean, by tilling or a good burn down. And then as you plant, your pre or residual in that, we've got those options there that Corteva offers. And then your post with corn, a lot of guys are just doing a single post and they're loading that tank up. And these are our options here: Full-Time, Keystone, Cairo, Realm Q, and now you can work confidently with Assure, Liberty, and our Enlist Duo, Enlist One. So as you're looking at that, if you aren't happy with what you're set up with, you've got more options now, and you've got the ability to go post with Enlist and really change up some of your modes of action. So this is a question that every field day last year in 23 that I got at least once. And, this sounds like you guys are doing just what happened with glyphosate, is we want all these crops sprayed with the same chemistry and you're going to create weed resistance. So having the tolerance in the crop itself does not create the resistance. It's the poor management of the herbicides. And many of us, if not all of us, are guilty to some extent of spraying. In my next slide, we'll get into that a little bit. But we want to utilize multiple modes of action. And I've got in there a slide or two here that we're talking about multiple modes of action. We want your friends in the fight with you. You don't go and take out, your biggest opponent by yourself. You make sure you get your friends or a backup to make sure that you can control that. I mentioned earlier that the Enlist E3 soybeans, we have over an 80% spray rate, and which thank you. And we really see that people are comfortable using that. And with corn, exactly. We have Enlist herbicide as an option. It's something that you can add to your program, not replace your program and put Enlist in there. We don't want anybody to just say, well, if I can just spray Enlist with glyphosate, I'm going to spray it on all my anchors, one tank mix, and for the next 3 years, that's all I'm doing. That's not what we're saying. We really want you to continue to use multiple modes of action. So I'll build this slide out here. The history. I talked about, everybody's kind of been guilty of one thing or another. What happened with glyphosate originally, it came out and it really made clean fields. So one product, it was relatively inexpensive compared to all the other ones that you had to put in back in the 80s. Well, glyphosate was easy. You put it in, you sprayed it, and it killed all the major weeds. It was very clean fields. So people, when it went and abandoned pre-emerge, they just said, okay, I'll do an early post. I'll do some Roundup, and it'll save on fuel. It'll save on my time, and it saves on chemistry. So people went out and did that, and they really saw that, okay, this works. And then wait a second, a few years into it, the rate that I was using wasn't quite strong enough. And so the recommendation and what the people did is they increased the rates. Maybe they added another pint, or maybe a couple of years later, they added another 2 pints. And so then the amount of glyphosate that was used kept creeping up and creeping up, creeping up. And the weeds then, the ones that survived were the ones that were resistant. And so that built up a lot of resistance to that single mode of action. And so we don't want people doing that. We want to make sure that you're controlling the weeds fully and you're using multiple modes of action. So this history is a perfect example of weed resistance. And what we're trying to do moving forward, especially in Enlist corn, is to make sure that we don't repeat that. Here's just a graphical representation from 96 to 2008. You can see on the green ones, soybean adoption of glyphosate tolerant or glyphosate trait was fast and furious. It was the tallest ones. The people adopted that the quickest. And then, as you can see with the blue, the people with corn adopted glyphosate tolerant corn a little bit slower. We envision that to be the same thing as we're moving with Enlist. Enlist E3 soybeans, quick adoption, over 55% of the market. With Enlist corn, it's going to be a slower adoption. On the right-hand side of that screen there, it just talks about the number of modes of action. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about modes of action. And as you can see, it as glyphosate was adopted, modes of action decreased. And we want to make sure that we're not promoting that we're actually promoting the opposite, that we're increasing the modes of action that people are using. This is a really good slide. It talks about the different active ingredient and how many weed species are already resistant to them. And so you can see atrazine is at the top, and it's probably not a surprise to many of you. Atrazine isn't something that people go out to target weeds with, but atrazine is a good helper in the tank. So it's still used broadly as a good helper, as a good secondary mode of action. Glyphosate is second. Arguably, glyphosate might be one of the newer modes of action out there in this list up here, but it's also one of the worst because of what has happened as a stewardship for that. So you can go through these and you can see, that there are a lot of weeds out there that are resistant to a lot of the chemistries already. And glyphosate is in red. That's important to bring out because on this next slide, as we look at it, you can see all of the red weeds. Now this shows the weeds that are resistant. All the red weeds are resistant to glyphosate already. You can see up on top, Palmer amaranth. Scott talked about that earlier. There's 9 different sites of action that Palmer is already resistant to. Ryegrass has got 12. And so you can go down and you can see some of those weeds that are already resistant to different herbicide modes of action. Just want to point out, if you look on the right, the other weeds that aren't listed on here, kochia, horseweed, ragweed, common and giant, Johnson grass, those are all ones that have resistance to some of them. Maybe not as many modes of action, but they're already on a list and are growing. So we really want to make sure we're using multiple modes of action so that these weeds don't survive. A dead weed can't breed resistance. So making sure we're controlling all that, as well as our waterways and ditches as well. This slide here, it proves our point to what we're trying to do. This was a study done by Purdue. On the top is weed density. And so the different colored lines are the different ways or cropping systems. The blue one is 2,4-D reline. So using 2,4-D by itself. And you can see on the top, the weed density or the number of weeds per acre are increasing the longer you use just one mode of action or reliant on one mode of action. On the bottom is the different numbers of weeds. And so every peak that you see there of that blue, that's a soybean year, and a valley is a corn year. And so you can see with corn, people's program has been reducing the number of weed species. And then in soybeans in the past, there's been an increase. However, if you look towards the bottom, they're diversified. That means multiple modes of action, multiple products that they're being used. And on both of those, it stays really low. And so using multiple modes of action really helps reduce not only the number of weeds out there, but the types of weeds that are there as well. Modes of action again. So here are some of the pre's that are common in corn. On the far right side, those are names that you guys may recognize: Python, Stinger, Atrazine, Callisto. Those are all brands of herbicide. And then you can backtrack towards the left and see what they actually are. On the label, it'll say group 2, group 4, group 5. And so those are the different modes of action that we're talking about, different, combining those. One of the things, that you'll see as you go forward is we really want you to use different modes of action, not the same mode of action with different brand names. So be sure you're looking at the label and you're using multiple modes of action. As we look on the next slide here, I think Scott, you took that.
Oh, what happened?
Well, just give me a second. There we go. So the next slide is the same as what we had before. However, the Enlist corn brings you more options and allows, these other ones. So if you look, Enlist 1 on the bottom there, it says various sites, and it's under group 4 because it's a growth letter, not growth regulator. It's an auxin. So if you go back on the top, Stinger is various sites. It's a group 4. So Stinger and Enlist are in the same mode of action, same group. And so we don't recommend going out with Stinger and Enlist One. Stinger happens to be dicamba. So spraying, there is, people still spray dicamba in corn, which volatilizes and causes issues in, in nearby crops. So one of the ways to get around having that dicamba damage is to switch, if you're using a dicamba, using a Stinger or something like that, is to replace that with Enlist One in Enlist corn. The other things are, just making sure you're using multiple modes of action. We're gonna, talk a little bit more about replacing dicamba in corn, because that is something that a lot of people are asking about. And so we're bringing a solution to the industry that'll help, solve that. So Scott and I both talked about being able to spray up to 30-inch tall corn or 48 with drops. If you're looking at Diflex label, the Diflex label says up to V10 or 36-inch corn. So it's real comparable. So if you've been spraying Diflex in the past, you can continue to spray at that same timing, but use Enlist One instead. If you have, problems with stuff nearby. However, if you look at the second one there where it says application restrictions, the Diflex label tells you not to apply if the corn is over 24 inches tall nearby, or I mean, if the corn is over 24 inches tall and there's soybeans nearby. So the soybeans nearby, if they're taller than 10 inches or they started to bloom, do not spray dicamba in your corn. So they're already, back when Diflex was labeled and the EPA was looking at it, they already saw that dicamba moved. And so they put up, fences, so to speak, an application to try to hedge that off. With Enlist One, we don't have any of those restrictions. If there's soybeans nearby, because soybeans are not a susceptible crop. So susceptible crops are listed on the label. But one thing I do want to pull out is on the bottom, these are not on the Enlist label because they're not susceptible. So we just mentioned soybeans. Alfalfa is another big one that's not susceptible. So you can spray corn and soybeans right next to an alfalfa field and not have to worry about, the restrictions that are on the label. Scott, I did see a question come through real quick. I'm gonna throw that out to you. What do I use in my post corn? He's got Palmer, and the Palmer is 2,4-D resistant. Liberty and dicamba currently is the only thing that works. What would you recommend in corn post where it's resistant to 2,4-D?
Well, I guess I would also be a little surprised if the Palmer truly was 2,4-D resistant. I mean, we're not suggesting that resistance won't happen, and then there might be some forms of it out there. Obviously there was a lot of press last year or two about some dicamba resistance forming. So we know auxin resistance will happen, and that's why we're talking about, what we're doing here. But so my suspicion is the Palmer's not. It's just tough to control Palmer. But in post-emergence corn, your options are getting limited more so, without the auxins in there. Your mesotrione, there's good, Callisto, there's good chance it might be HPPD resistant already as well. So I think in that instance, I think we're really going to have to rely heavily on our pre-emergence herbicides in there. But I think the other thing, as Tony's talked about, is I would really emphasize timing and having that belts and suspenders approach, multiple modes of action pre, multiple modes of action post as your best approach to it. And Palmer's a tough one. There's just no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's a good answer. So yeah, timing, small weeds, and the other thing is if you're not causing problems with your neighbors, then you can stay with what you're doing. But the problem that we're running into and we want to get ahead of, because one thing I don't want our comparison to sound like is we're not knocking dicamba. Dicamba is a great tool, and we don't want to lose that tool. We don't want the EPA or some of the protesters out there to get in front of us and to remove dicamba from our toolbox. Dicamba kills weeds, and it's really good at controlling weeds, and we want to make sure we can still utilize that. But spraying it at the right timing being sensitive to your neighbors and making sure that you're not causing an issue that protesters or the EPA can point their finger at and say, nope, we can't do that, and they pull dicamba from our use. So that's what we're really wanting to do. Use the right tool at the right time, to make sure you're not using the wrong tool. That was a very good question, though. Spraying Enlist. We've got a couple of minutes here. I'm going to buzz through these really fast. North to south wind. You got Enlist corn, and the wind is blowing right towards some soybeans that are Roundup Extend 2. Can you spray them? Yes. The reason is because the soybeans are not susceptible. The thing that you'll see is there's tomatoes over there. If it's directly parallel to a sensitive crop, really be careful. Because if you've ever watched a flag blown in the wind, sometimes it's blowing south, sometimes it's blowing southeast, sometimes it's blowing southwest. Really make sure that you're not going to get any physical drift over there. Same thing from the south to the north. Yes, you can spray Enlist in corn with a sensitive area, meaning those trees are to the north. You just got to remember, you have to leave a 30-foot buffer, and only a 30-foot buffer. There's some other technology out there that you need to leave like a 300 or a 330-foot buffer. With Enlist, it's only 30-foot near sensitive area. I'm going to just bypass some of these here. Enlist cornfield with Enlist corn and a cornfield without Enlist. And so you're spraying Enlist and dicamba north to south. Can you spray? We covered that earlier. You can with Enlist. Do not spray if, and those are those conditions there, if there's soybeans nearby and the corn is over 24 inches. If the soybeans are more than 10 inches tall or bloom. So there's things you got to really watch when you're looking at dicamba and corn. Even if the soybeans are traded for dicamba, the label says that you shouldn't. Not that we're the police or anything, but just know that those restrictions are out there. Enlist corn, wind going north. Yes, as I covered before, 30-foot buffer. But with dicamba and corn, no. You really need to apply as directed. When sensitive crops are nearby, you're not supposed to spray dicamba when the wind is blowing towards them. Scott, I don't know if you want to cover this slide. This is one of our final slides for those of you who are still with us. This is one that's really a comparison, pros and cons.
Yeah, I just burned through it real quickly. So the features with 4 herbicide modes of action, there's a lot of flexibility, right? Tony went through that here. And I think I want people to know that you can certainly plan on spraying your fields with Enlist and making it part of your program in corn. We don't apologize for that. We just want to be cognizant of making technologies last as well and taking the right approach to it. And I think we'll be fine there, but tremendous flexibility with Enlist corn, whether it's PowerCore or Vorceed. The physical drift, we have the ColXD, it lands on target. Because of the choline, it stays on target. That's the next point, near zero volatility. Soybeans are not a susceptible crop. Doesn't matter what technology they are, they can be downwind. We can spray up 30-inch corn, big window. And, people like the fact that it's a U.S. made product, formulated in Iowa, actives made in Michigan.
That's really good. And a lot of the product or the timing of other products that are coming from overseas, we've seen over the last few years, especially in 21, 22, it's been a problem. And with Enlist, it's local. We're not putting it on a boat, so to speak. And so we're able to have a relatively constant supply. Scott, do you want to cover all the summaries going forward?
Yeah, just real quickly, folks, and keeping us on time. We talked about the robust 10 traits in there with forward breeding. I think everybody understands that this is the leading trait package out there. With Enlist, we do talk about being neighbor friendly. And then we talk about responsible stewardship. We want that as well. Just remember, folks, dead weeds don't breed. Tony said it, dead weeds don't breed. If you go with comprehensive package and you get weed control, you're not going to have resistance concerns. And as always, we talk about going to enlist.com. You know, you're going to find more stuff on enlist.com if you just spend a little time there. The trainings are there. All of the things we hand out are there. Great link to use as you go forward. And then, you know, you hear us talk about Enlist Ahead. What Enlist Ahead means, it means we have management resources available to you. It means we are very proactive on education and training. We are available, Tony and I. You have an Enlist specialist you can use. If you're a licensee or whoever you are, you feel free to use us out there. And of course, your crop protection territory managers from Corteva and your seed providers, all great resources. But then Enlist Ahead through us to the resources, the education, training, technology advancements that you get with Enlist. So, Tony, did we have any final questions? We are at 9. I don't see more questions coming in. I'm excited to get to talk to people across the United States about Enlist. Tony and I both are.
Yep.
It really does offer a lot of utility and flexibility to growers, whether it's corn, soybeans, or cotton. So, again, we're here to help.
Yeah, I put a couple of links into the chat. If those of you who are interested, application flexibility and things like that. One of them was Kansas State, and the other one is from enlist.com. So you can really find some resources. We are at the end, but if anybody has any questions, we will stay on until all the questions are answered. Currently, we don't have any, but be sure to, as Scott mentioned, to talk to your Corteva rep. You know, find your Enlist specialist in your area, and get your questions answered, so that as you're coming through, you'll be able to confidently use Enlist in your system.
Quickly, question, will this webinar be on again? Yes, it's scheduled. I don't have, yes, I do too have that scheduled.
If you go to enlist.com, you can find them. As you're looking, Scott, I'll put a
February
post
15th,
in,
March 19th.
March 19th is the next one.
February 15th will be the next one with Steve Snyder, Brett Gordon. March 19th with Ben Benton and Bridget.
Very good. Well, it'll be Ben and I think Mark Mongan.
Yes.
But I will post a link into the chat here where you can see all the previous webinars. We do record these and we'll post them up. So if you actually want to look at this exact one, so you can hear your question be answered again, by all means, you can do that. It's on enlist.com. We try to post them as well as other trainings. We have a virtual tech tour and we have some other things out there just to help people get more education. Well, Scott, it's 10:03. I don't see any other questions in there. I think what we'll do is we'll thank everybody. Thank you again for all your support and the time, and we'll close it out. And you guys have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.